Well, hello again, it's Megaraptor. So, we're doing reactions again today, and as always, we'll start off with the obligatory audio test. Hello again, it's Seems to work well enough, or good enough. So, today it's, further reaction videos we couldn't do last week. I've got a bit more time on my hands today, so let's see how many we can get through. First up, Benji Thomas. By the way, guys, links to all the channels we react to most of the time are in the live stream description, so you can check out the original videos right there. And first up today, it's Benji Thomas with the apex predators of the Earth before the dinosaurs, and he's got an Omnidence M plus in the thumbnail, so this is gonna go as far back as the Permian. I'm not gonna no, I'll just start and we'll talk about each time period in the process of the video.
The dinosaurs are such an iconic group of prehistoric animals that gave rise to some of the most awe-inspiring predators of all time. But this lineage of reptiles was not the only chapter in the great history of life on Earth. Hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaurs evolved, Earth was home to a whole host of very different, yet still formidable predatory animals. So let's take a trip back through time to explore the apex predators of our planet before the dinosaurs truly rose to dominate the terrestrial environments.
That should be Ankylosaurus, I think, from the Permian.
We'll travel period by period, featuring a few examples of the top predators of each slice of prehistory, and their incredible anatomy and adaptations that enabled them to top the food webs of the times.
Okay, so we're even going pre-Paleozoic here.
First of all, we're travelling back more than 500 million years to a period of time known as the Ediacaran. Life during the Ediacaran was a far cry from the world we're used to today, but it was during this part of Earth's prehistory that multicellular life first became truly complex and widespread.
Yeah, but no vertebrate animals, I'm pretty sure.
The Ediacaran biota, the name given to the organisms alive during this time, mainly comprise small, soft-bodied creatures that inhabited the sea floor and came in a variety of shapes, including circular, segmented forms that moved about slowly and fed on microbial mats, as well as immobile organisms that looked like small fronds projecting from the seabed, plus many other kinds of early life. For a while, it was thought that the Ediacaran biota did not really feature any true animal predators, and that these ecosystems remained relatively simple until the following Cambrian period. During the Cambrian, a so-called explosion of evolution occurred, starting approximately 538.8 million years ago and giving rise to most of the major lineages of modern animal groups. So the older Ediacaran, it was thought, stayed pretty simple and full of now extinct side branches of organisms, until that tipping point was reached. However, more recent finds of Ediacaran fossils suggest that things were not quite so simple back then. Evidence of increased mobility, burrowing behaviours in some organisms, and even the appearance of some predatory animals in the Ediacaran hint at a much more lively world, and a
Unlike the Cambrian, this is probably more worm-like apex predators. Are really, really simple animals. Really, really simple.
more gradual slide into the complexity and radiation of life that followed in the Cambrian period. One of the examples of an Ediacaran predator is an ancient kind of Cnidarian, the major group that includes jellyfish and corals. Called Aurora lumina attenborei, this creature had simple yet densely packed tentacles enclosed within a rigid organic skeleton that would have been cemented to the ocean floor. At just
W naming. Shoutouts Edinburgh.
8 inches tall, Aurora lumina would have used its numerous tentacles to capture passing plankton in the water, and therefore may have been feeding on an early kind of prehistoric zooplankton, tiny animal life that floated in the water column. As such, this jellyfish relative from around 560 million years ago could be considered one of the first animal predators on the planet. The discovery of traces created by Scelidophorans some 539 million years ago also adds to the emerging picture of the Ediacaran as a more hostile time than previously imagined. Scelidophorans include various living members of marine invertebrates, many of which are quite worm-like things, including the aptly named penis worms. Scelidophorans were certainly predatory animals during the periods following the Ediacaran, hiding in sediment and then inverting their hook-covered proboscises out to capture prey. So evidence of their activities in the Ediacaran suggests they were already feeding on other animals even back then. So yeah, it turns out you can tell all your friends that some of the oldest top predators on the planet may have been penis worms, or
Yeah, nice guys. Some guys will definitely laugh at that if you tell them that, especially uneducated people. So where were we? 3 minutes.
years ago also adds to the emerging picture of the Ediacaran as a more hostile time than previously imagined. Scelidophorans include named penis sediment and then inverting their hooks. They were already feeding on other animals even back then. So yeah, it turns out you can tell all your friends that some of the oldest top predators on the planet may have been penis worms, or relatives of them at least. What a fantastic world we live in. Fast forwarding a few million years to the Cambrian period, this stretch of time witnessed the emergence of the animals commonly considered the planet's first apex predators. These
Yeah. So we are talking about even older animals than the arthropods. I think pan arthropods. So especially Anomalocaris was a well-known Cambrian apex predator for most of the time, but Omnidens is 5 times bigger, or it's 5 times bigger in length actually. So it's like 1.5 meters. A big crawly.
were the radiodonts, a fantastic group related to the arthropods that includes the famous Anomalocaris. These marine predators were giants for the time, with some, such as Amplectobelua, achieving total body lengths of around 90 centimeters or 3 feet. The largest known radiodont was Iderocassis, however, known from fossils found in Morocco that suggest it was a filter feeder. This beast could grow to more than 2 meters in length, over 6.6 feet. The
Even bigger than Omnidens.
evolutionary arms race triggered by the Cambrian explosion of life meant that this time period saw the relatively rapid appearance of all kinds of new organisms with various hard parts to defend themselves from the new predators on the scene. Anomalocaris, everyone's favourite giant shrimp of death, would have been a formidable predator of the mostly much smaller animals it shared its environment with. Moving itself through the water by undulating its paired flaps, it would seek out its prey using its acute vision provided by the compound eyes mounted on stalks, before seizing its selected victim with its raptorial front appendages and pulling them towards their pineapple ring mouths. Although Anomalocaris has long been reconstructed as the terror of the trilobites, utilizing its appendages to grab these marine arthropods and flex their exoskeletons until breaking point, recent work has shown that the spines on the appendages would not have been strong enough to withstand the forces involved with crunching trilobites. As such, Anomalocaris was probably a predator of soft-body prey instead. So trilobites were safe from this apex hunter, but softer animals that swam about in the water column would have lived in fear of the shrimp of doom, especially as it seems it was an efficient swimmer at high speeds.
Yeah, so Anomalocaris always, if I see this animal, I always think what an alien world it was back then. It's so different from today.
The even larger radiodont Amplectobelua, which lived around 518 million years ago, exhibits some intriguing modifications to its frontal appendages, such as an enlarged spine protruding down and forwards to essentially form a pincer. Another of the terrifying top predators during the Cambrian was a creature known as Omnidens. This animal has had a rather convoluted classification history with a few different interpretations of what it might really have been, since it was only known from mouthpart fossils for a long time, though some bits of appendage have also been discovered now. The most recent reinterpretation of this creature posits that it was closely related to the arthropods, and potentially resembled the much more completely known Pandalurion, but at a larger scale, reaching about 1.5 meters in length or 4.9 feet. As such, Omnidens likely resembled.
So the thing with Omnidens is that you've seen its mouth there. There are not much fossils of the holotype. You've got parts of the forelimbs, if you want to call them that, and you've got the mouth. But scaling from these fragmentary remains, this animal should be about 1.5 to 2 meters in length, and one of the biggest predators, if it's not a filter feeder, one of the biggest pure predators, pure carnivorous animals of the Cambrian. alongside some big radiodonts, as you already heard.
Reaching about 1.5 meters in length, or 4.9 feet. As such, Omnidens likely resembled the radiodonts in that it possessed paired body flaps for locomotion and had raptorial appendages, as well as a circular mouth with several rings of needle-sharp teeth. If Omnidens really did achieve this sort of size, then this beast can undoubtedly be considered another apex predator of the Cambrian. Jumping forward through time once again, we arrive at the Ordovician period. Throughout most of this era, animal life remained confined to the oceans, but it appears that the first basic land plants became established partway through the period. Enormous nautiloids inhabited the prehistoric waters, and the emergence of eurypterids meant that the Ordovician seas were still very much the domain of the invertebrates, with these large predators occupying the top positions in the ancient food webs. With little else to truly challenge the largest nautiloids for the position of apex predators, these unnervingly large mollusks would likely have had full reign over most other organisms inhabiting the Ordovician sea floors. The giant cephalopods of the Ordovician are often referred to as orthocones. However, this is more of an informal term that specifically describes the anatomy of their shells, long, straight, and cone-shaped, in contrast to the spiraling shells of other nautiloids, as we see in the living species. The maximum sizes for the Ordovician orthoconic nautiloids have also been somewhat exaggerated in popular media, probably most famously in the Walking with Dinosaurs spin-off Chased by Sea Monsters, in which an orthocone is reconstructed as being up to 11 meters in length, or up to 36 feet. This length estimate likely stems from an unconfirmed report of a 10-meter-long specimen, but unfortunately there's a notable lack of evidence supporting the actual existence of this particular fossil, and it was apparently lost a long time ago.
However, species like Camarasaurus and more notably for its size, Endosaurus still reach sizes of about 8 meters or 26 feet from what I've heard.
However, there are still some absolutely enormous confirmed orthocones, such as a specimen in Harvard University's collection referred to the species Endosaurus giganteum that reached 3 meters in length, or 9.8 feet. This fossil is only partial, however, and reconstructing the whole length has yielded an estimated total of 5.73 meters, or 18.8 feet, for the complete shell. So it's not hard to imagine giant Endosaurus individuals floating over the seafloor, picking up prey along the bottom with their mighty arms and crunching with their formidable beaks. The Ordovician oceans also witnessed the origin of a group we'll be seeing more of in the next two time periods, the eurypterids, the so-called sea scorpions, which, although they are arthropods, were not scorpions at all. They also were not restricted to just the sea either. The oldest eurypterid discovered so far was found in Iowa, and it was a pretty big beast too. Called Pentecopterus, it has an estimated length of around 1.7 meters, or 5.6 feet, and it was undoubtedly a top predator within its environment, with large front limbs that were oriented to point forward for grappling prey.
For a while, I think Jacalopterus was considered the biggest eurypterid, at least in length, but there is an even bigger one, I think, in overall body mass.
Although Pentecopterus was the biggest eurypterid from the Ordovician we found so far, they were about to get a whole lot larger.
Okay, so it's Pentecopterus. Yeah, but the Ordovician was, nautiloid, apex predator territory.
We'll see. The Silurian period truly was the time of the eurypterids. These fascinating arthropods became remarkably diverse, with numerous species recognized from across the world. Most of the known eurypterids have been found in rocks dating to the Silurian, filling various niches as generalist hunters, scavengers, and large apex predators. These creatures were clearly crucial components of Silurian ecosystems. One of the biggest Silurian eurypterids found so far is called Acutiramus bohemicus, with an estimated maximum length of around 2.1 meters or 6.9 feet. This species lived right at the very end of the Silurian and turns up in the following Devonian period as well. It belongs to a very specialized group of eurypterids called the pterygotids. It had a long, fairly slender body, a squared-off head, and well-developed chelicerae, the pincer-bearing arms at the front.
I think Pterygotus was in was it Walking with Monsters? I think he was part of that. Yeah, he was part of that series as an apex predator, I think. So I don't know if this genus is the biggest in mass, but definitely one of the biggest in length.
Along with other pterygotids, Acutiramus was probably quite an agile swimmer, propelling itself with its paddle limbs and using its flattened tail as a rudder to enable sudden changes in direction. However, it's not certain if pterygotids were particularly fast when it came to sustained swimming. It was undoubtedly a feared predator in the Silurian seas though, feasting on the unfortunate smaller invertebrates and perhaps also jawless fishes it shared its environment with.
By the way, in the next period, especially at the Devonian, there will be the rise of the fish and the vertebrates for that matter.
gauging the vicious-looking denticles projecting from its chelicerae to dismantle its victims. But although the Silurian was still mostly the realm of the giant invertebrate predators, the vertebrates, the group that would eventually give rise to our own ancestors, were actually producing some sizable predators as well. Up until 2014, there was no evidence of any Silurian fishes achieving maximum lengths of more than about half a meter, or around 1.6 feet. But then, Megamastax amblyodus was discovered in 423 million-year-old rocks in China. This animal was over a meter in length, more than 3.3 feet, making it the largest vertebrate to have lived before the Devonian period, as far as we currently know. This predatory lobe-finned fish had an interesting combination of different tooth types. Like other related Silurian fishes, it had rows of fine, very sharp marginal teeth spanning the edges of the jaws. But unlike these relatives, it also had a row of blunted, dome-shaped teeth fused onto the insides of the lower jaws. It looks like these differing tooth types helped the fish to grasp hard-shelled prey in its mouth, and then crunch down on them with the larger blunted teeth to get to their insides. Perhaps then it was feeding on the heavily armored fishes it coexisted with, representing the earliest vertebrate apex predator in the fossil record. Megamastax was certainly a sign of things to come, as the following period saw the rise of the first truly terrifying vertebrate top predators. The Devonian period was when vertebrate life really started to take off. There's a reason this period is often referred to as the Age of Fishes. These animals achieved a staggering diversity, with now extinct armored fish, called the placoderms, giving rise to some formidable apex predator species. Ancient shark and ray relatives diversified during this period too, and the ancestors of the land-living tetrapods, which later gave rise to mammals such as us, also became a distinct branch within lobe-finned fishes and began to experiment with terrestrial life towards the latter parts of the period. Life on land started to become more established around this time too, as the first true forests appeared, and the world became a greener place. Of course, we can't talk about apex predators of the Devonian without mentioning the dunk. Dunkleosteus is an iconic giant armored fish that terrorized the Devonian seas, and although recent publications have found that it's a little smaller than previous size estimates indicated, it was still probably not something you'd want to get in the water with.
Yeah, Engelman actually said that the dunk, with its now up to I think 4.1 meters and about a ton in size, can play the same role in an ecosystem of a apex predator or of an apex predator like the great white shark. So it's the equivalent to a great white shark back then. Now the great white shark is not the biggest animal in today's seas, but it's still an apex predator, just like Dunkleosteus.
The largest known species, Dunkleosteus terrelli, likely reached a maximum length of around 4.1 meters, or about 13.5 feet, and the anatomy of its armored head and jaws leaves little room for doubt that this was a fearsome apex hunter. I mean, just look at the fossil material itself. How insane does that head look? Dunkleosteus had unique jaw biomechanics that enabled the predator to open and close its jaws extremely rapidly, and deliver bite forces estimated at over 7,400 newtons, remarkably high for a fish. These forces drove the menacing-looking dental plates together, not true teeth but bladed projections of bone ideally suited for shearing actions. Recent reinterpretations of this iconic predator have left it looking far more deep and stocky than older reconstructions presented it. This suggests that it was a truly pelagic animal, roaming across the open Devonian seas and swimming in a tuniform style, a fast and efficient mode of locomotion. Dunkleosteus was likely capable of quick bursts of rapid acceleration and was a highly maneuverable fish, making it difficult for its prey to escape those bladed plates of death. Other armoured placoderm fish would also have been top predators during the Devonian, with examples such as the dunk's close relative, Eastmanosteus, also growing to quite sizable dimensions and wielding nasty-looking toothy blades. As well as vertebrates, the Eurypterids were still going in the Devonian too. In fact, it was during the Devonian that the largest Eurypterid we know of, which also makes it the largest arthropod we know of, existed. This was Jaekelopterus, another member of the specialized pterygotid family of sea scorpions.
So he is still the biggest, at least by length. I think they are going by length here. I would be interested in weight, to be honest.
Going off an enormous isolated claw belonging to Jaekelopterus found in the early Devonian of Germany, paleontologists scaled up the size of the animal this claw would have belonged to using the dimensions of related species. They found that this enormous Jaekelopterus potentially reached between 2.3 and 2.6 meters in length, or 7.5 to 8.5 feet. Truly a monstrous aquatic arthropod. Interestingly, Jaekelopterus appears to have been a freshwater Eurypterid, so even the rivers of this time weren't safe to venture into. Things only got deadlier during the following Carboniferous period, once life on land was fully established.
To be honest, I think he missed out on like adestoids. I don't remember the exact animal, but there was I think Cyvidus. Wasn't he? No, he was in the Carboniferous and Permian, I think. So, but I think there are even bigger apex predator fish than Dankliosteus back then. I think he missed out there. Obviously, correct me in the chat or in the comments if I'm tripping.
Things only got deadlier during the following Carboniferous period. Once life on land was fully established, whole new ecosystems opened up, and the evolution of apex predators at the tops of these terrestrial and freshwater food chains was inevitable. The invertebrates, being the first animals to commit to the land, produced some pretty formidable predators in the Carboniferous, such as the rather large Pulmonoscorpius, which was indeed a true scorpion, not a eurypterid, and could reach up to 70 centimeters or 2.3 feet in length. But really, this was the time when the apex vertebrate predators started to shine. A kind of early relative of the tetrapods called Watcheria deltae may have been among the first of the vertebrate top predators in freshwater terrestrial habitats, even being called the T-Rex of its time by some paleontologists, as this beast could grow to more than 2 meters in length and had a reinforced narrow skull perfect for resisting struggling prey, along with very sharp, piercing fangs in its jaws. The early Carboniferous Watcheria would likely still have been restricted to spending most of its time in lakes or rivers, though its robust limbs likely meant it could walk along the bottom of the riverbeds or perhaps even wade in the shallows.
Yeah, he will also have to talk about the amphibians and large freshwater fish like Rhizodus, as well as probably open sea predators like shark relatives. I think should be shark relatives. This time it's definitely Diadestoids and the likes of Cyvidus, like really big fish, multiple ton animals.
Another group of early tetrapod relatives that included a few pretty large predators are the embolomirs, which appeared in the early Carboniferous and radiated into quite a few species during the latter part of the period. These were again semi-aquatic, mostly freshwater animals with some indications that certain members could have undertaken short excursions onto land. So kind of big amphibian-like versions of modern crocs. Makes sense why the Carboniferous is sometimes called the Age of Amphibians. Anthracosaurus is one embolomere that grew to some rather large dimensions, with estimates of its body length reaching about 3 meters or 10 feet. Another is Proterogerhinus, potentially up to 2.5 meters long or over 8 feet. Fossils of this species preserve evidence of strong limbs and other indications that they could probably walk on land too. Rhizodus was another pretty terrifying apex predator of the Carboniferous. Also
Absolute cinema. Rhizodus from the rivers, like the biggest freshwater fish of all time, up to potentially 6 to 7 meters in length, 20 plus to 23 feet, and 1.5 tons in weight, metric tons. That's the size estimates I remember doing for my video.
a freshwater inhabitant, Rhizodus was a lobe-finned fish, and therefore related to the broader group that gave rise to the tetrapods. It's been estimated to have reached lengths of more than 5.5 meters, or over 18 feet. Some estimates also go as far as 7 meters, or 23 feet, meaning Rhizodus was potentially the largest freshwater fish known to science. These elongate aquatic vertebrates were another reason not to take a dip in the Carboniferous rivers, patrolling these waterways and employing their elongate curved teeth to dispatch smaller animals, perhaps even launching out of the water like a modern croc at unsuspecting animals on riverbanks.
There is literally some, I think, short tracks of a big rhizodont, and it's probably Rhizodus, judging by the size I've heard from a colleague.
The deeper waters of the Carboniferous wouldn't have offered much sanctuary from apex hunters either. The cartilaginous fishes, the group that includes the sharks and rays, produced a couple of big top predators, such as Idestus, a great white shark-sized fish with blade-like teeth that grew in a midline wall out of the jaws.
Yeah. Then we've got Stenocampus, I think, and a few others. Very big predatory fish.
Similarly, Orthocanthus was a cartilaginous fish that inhabited freshwaters and grew to be almost 3 meters, and with its long, eel-like body and spine projecting out of its back, would have been a top predator of Carboniferous swamp environments. Truly, the Carboniferous was a terrifying period to be a small amphibious tetrapod. The next period, the Permian, would have been an even worse time, however. During the early Permian, one group of now fully terrestrial tetrapods gave rise to some fearsome apex predators, the Sphenacodontids, which includes the iconic Dimetrodon. Although this sail-backed animal is often called a dinosaur, it is actually a synapsid, the same highly diverse group of tetrapods to which mammals belong. So it's more closely related to mammals such as us than to dinosaurs. Don't let those tubes of toy prehistoric animals fool you. The largest species of Dimetrodon discovered in Texas could grow to about 4.6 meters long, or around 15 feet, and with its sharp, specialized, and serrated teeth, it would have been a deadly killer of other tetrapods. In fact, we have some good evidence of Dimetrodon's feeding habits in the form of unfortunate specimens of the strange little boomerang-headed amphibians Diplocaulus, which have chunks taken out of them. Associated with these bitten amphibians were shed teeth from Dimetrodon, indicating that these top predators were snacking on Diplocaulus that had burrowed into mud to survive the dry seasons.
Smart animals. Yeah, a foreshadowing of what should come from mammals. Also, because we're talking amphibians again, definitely. I think the what are they called? The lineage from where Suchus and Mastodonsaurus are from, the Temnus bundles, the biggest amphibians. So they should be in this video definitely. Also, dinocephalians like Ankylosaurus will be in the Permian, and Gorgonopsids.
So again, it was not an ideal time to be a small amphibian. Another possible relative of Dimetrodon, a poorly known species called Tapanosaurus, was likely also a top predator of the mid-Permian, with one estimate putting its length at about 5.5 meters or 18 feet. However, it's only known from fragmentary fossils. The mid-Permian terrestrial environments were undoubtedly ruled by the Dinocephalians. This remarkably diverse lineage was another group of synapsids, so again related to mammals, and actually closer to them than the sphenacodontids were. The Dinocephalians can be thought of as, in a way, like dinosaurs before the dinosaurs. Various small and large herbivorous, omnivorous, and carnivorous species evolved and filled a range of terrestrial niches. However, they all went extinct by the end of the mid-Permian, 260 million years ago. Moschops is probably the most well-known example, a large plant eater. But it was the massive carnivores such as Ankylosaurus and Titanophonius that made this such a deadly group. Titanophonius, which literally means Titanic murderer, was potentially 3 to 5 meters long, while Ankylosaurus, at around 5 to possibly 6 meters, is the largest known carnivorous land predator of the Permian found so far. This thing's skull was insane, being extremely pachyostotic or thickened by bone, and also featuring prominent bosses and wielding huge canines as well as extra teeth on the roof of the mouth. This apex hunter would likely have preyed on other Dinocephalians, reptilian pariasaurs, and smaller tetrapods. After the mid-Permian extinctions, it was then time for the Gorgonopsians to take center stage. Everyone loves the Gorgonopsians. These synapsids, which were again even more closely related to the ancestors of mammals than the Dinocephalians, yielded some awesome top predators during the late Permian, such as
Sevia. It's crazy how the mammal ancestors actually ruled a period on land before the mammals did.
the enormous Inostrancevia, measuring 3 to 3.5 meters, 9.8 to 11.5 feet, and the large, heavily built Rubigia. Like Ankylosaurus, Rubigia had a remarkably pachyostotic skull, characterized by significant bone thickening to strengthen it for inflicting powerful bites. The Gorgonopsians are probably most famous for their saber teeth, which evolved convergently with much later saber-toothed cat predators. Like the cats that lived millions of years later, these deadly weapons would have been sunk deep into their prey's flesh, driven by powerful neck muscles, and they also seemed very well adapted for grasping prey with their fore and hind limbs. Various other large predatory species emerged among the lineages that diverged just before the mammal ancestors separated. One notable example is Moscarinus, a macropredator that lived right at the end of the Permian and actually outlived the Gorgonopsians, making it into the early Triassic through the end Permian mass extinction, or Great Dying, the most severe extinction in Earth's history.
We've heard this predator on Extinct Zoos video the other week or 2 weeks ago.
Moscarinus was a robust creature with a short, stocky snout, and its different proportions compared to the Gorgonopsians likely allows them to coexist as top predators, and seemingly enabled Moscarinus to outlive them as well. Returning to the waters, the early and mid-Permian was also home to Helicoprion, the buzzsaw shark. Well, not actually a shark, despite it often being called that, but a cartilaginous fish related to modern chimeras. A relative of Edestus, Helicoprion's tooth walls took on a spiral arrangement within the lower jaw and were suited for consuming soft-bodied prey, with teeth at the back cutting and pushing prey further into the mouth, middle teeth piercing and cutting, and the front teeth being used to hook more of the prey into the mouth. Helicoprion has been estimated to have reached a maximum of 7 meters or nearly 23 feet in length too, so this was one rather large buzzsaw attached to a giant fish. Finally, we arrive in the Triassic period, the first period of the Mesozoic era, and the slice of time during which the first dinosaurs evolved. The oldest dinosaurs would have originated
Yeah. So this should be pseudosuchians, obviously, on land, and um, in the waters, it's big fish and especially ichthyosaurs.
Sometime between about 245 and 233 million years ago, in the Middle Triassic. But the early Triassic was home to all sorts of non-dinosaurian apex predators. The Permian-Triassic boundary was marked by a devastating mass extinction driven by intense volcanic activity, and so many of the niches in the early Triassic world were open for different groups of animals to exploit. The Archosauromorph reptiles were one such group, a major lineage that includes all the crocs and dinosaurs, as well as numerous other diverse extinct groups. The Proterosuchids, which had originated in the Permian and survived the extinction, managed to grow fairly big in the early Triassic and produced some top predators, such as Proterosuchus itself, which could get to a maximum length of up to 4 meters, or over 13 feet. These sprawling reptiles would have looked quite crocodilian-like, and were likely semi-aquatic, but they lacked bony skin armor like modern crocs, and they had distinctive downturned snout tips. Exactly what the function of this overhanging upper jaw tip was is not clear, but proposed explanations have included a signaling function to potential mates, kind of like in modern salmon, or maybe some sort of unusual feeding method. The erythrosuchids were another of the first large archosauromorph land predators to evolve in the Triassic.
Paleo-Content is such a cool group, actually, there are so many cool animals within the early Axoromorphs.
Disproportionately massively headed quadrupedal reptiles with bulky bodies and also with downturned snout tips. These reptiles likely had quite upright standing postures, rather than possessing sprawling gaits, and so would have been efficient terrestrial stalkers. The largest known member, Erythrosuchus, was the biggest land predator of the time, approaching 5 meters long, or nearly 16.4 feet. Another Archosaurian lineage with some large predatory species in the early and mid-Triassic was the family Tenosauriscidae. This was a fantastic group of reptiles, continuing with the trend of possessing a sail along the back that we also saw in the Permian Dimetrodon and which would much later be copied again by the Spinosaurs. Arizonosaurus is perhaps the most well-known member of the group. These quadrupedal archosaurs potentially used their sails for displaying to other members of their species, and at the sizes they reached were probably fairly top-level predators for their time. Heading once more back into the seas of the world before the dinosaurs, the mid-Triassic was no time to take a dip. Living around 244 million years ago was an enormous ichthyosaur called Symbospondylus youngorum, which had a skull measuring about 2 meters, 6.6 feet, and a probable total length of more than 17 meters, or 55.8 feet. This sperm whale-sized predator can be considered the planet's first super predator, feeding on fish, cephalopods, and probably taking out smaller marine reptiles if it wanted to.
Probably the first predator to reach over 10 metric tons,
Also
isn't
in the
it?
mid-Triassic, another apex ichthyosaur predator is
Phalatocarbon?
known to have existed, Thalattoarchon. At an estimated length of more than 8.6 meters or 28 feet, Thalattoarchon has a massive skull and tooth anatomy indicating it was most certainly a macropredator, with flattened teeth possessing distinct cutting surfaces for tearing through flesh. So it didn't take long after the Great Dying for life in the sea to get giant and produce some truly awesome reptilian top predators. More giant ichthyosaurs would evolve later on in the Triassic, and back on land, various other groups of archosauromorph lineages related to the crocs also produced massive apex terrestrial predators during the late Triassic, such as the Prestosuchids, Rauisuchids, Shuvosaurids, and Poposaurids. However, they were living alongside the dinosaurs at this point in time. So this brings us pretty much to the end of the apex predators of Earth before the dinosaurs. So there we have it, a trip through time, exploring various of the world's most ancient hunters. I also just want to note that it's important to remember that every single one of the apex predators I've talked about here was ideally suited to its environment and lifestyle, and we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking of the predators in each time period as somehow becoming better compared to the ones in previous periods. It's sometimes hard not to think about the prehistory of life on Earth as a long progression of animals improving over time, especially from our vantage point in the present day, looking back over the whole fossil record. But evolution doesn't work like that. Each predator was the result of various selection pressures acting on populations in existence at the time, as they responded to changes in the environment and food webs, leading to lineages modifying and building upon their ancestral body plans. I'm sure I've probably missed some species in this video that count as apex predators of their time, but I hope this has been a worthwhile overview of the awesome carnivores that existed on our planet before the dinosaurs. If you liked this video, let me know if you'd like another one, perhaps looking at the apex predators that lived after the dinosaurs, or even non-dinosaur apex predators that lived alongside the dinosaurs.
Yeah, he should probably do these 2 videos, would be very interesting to see.
And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed.
So, shoutouts to Benji Thomas. Their channel is linked down below in the video description.
Which theropods could be bigger than Tyrannosaurus?
So next up, you've already heard it, the Vividan again, with which theropods could be bigger than Tyrannosaurus. Yeah, this is a see. He's probably looking at all other major theropod groups or theropod groups with at least a candidate that's close to the megatheropod. But with these claws, don't hype me up, man. I hope that's not a Megaraptorida. Yeah, if there's another Megaraptorida that could be a Megatheropod, this would be so much hype. But I think Maip is at least getting a mention. I hope. But definitely, we're talking about big Spinosaurus and Megalosaurus as well as the Allosaurus or Carnosaurus, especially Carcharodontosaurus, of course.
Which theropods could be bigger than Tyrannosaurus? Mainstream media seems obsessed with finding carnivorous dinosaurs that match or exceed the tyrant lizard king when it comes to body size, but do any of those challengers actually stack up? First, we're going to look at known specimens of Tyrannosaurus to figure out what benchmarks we need to surpass. Then, we'll review all the giant fragmentary theropods that have a shot at being bigger than the tyrant king, evaluating.
Yeah, the benchmarks are 10 plus metric tons or 10 to 15 metric tons. Yeah, a belly sauce is, by the way, a good shout if there is anything close to the Disney's Carnotaur in size.
Each one's preservation quality and chances of becoming top dog in the theropod world. Go ahead and comment with your prediction of which theropods could topple T-Rex, and subscribe if you haven't already for more paleontology analysis. If you think megatheropods are cool, and if you're watching this video you probably do, you might enjoy my new book, Extinction Obsidian Dawn. This epic alternate history military fantasy covers a war between the Aztecs and Carthage, but both sides have psychic dinosaurs. Obsidian Dawn
Guys, if you're interested, check that one out.
things like military history, ancient civilizations, and prehistoric animal fights. And back to the video. In order for this video to make any kind of sense, we need to establish a typical adult size for T-Rex. So, how do we know, out of all the dozens of specimens we have, which ones are adults? The truth is that establishing adulthood in dinosaurs known only from fossils is a mess, with layers of uncertainty and different definitions. Let's explore a few options.
So what was that meme here? Paleo fans coming to terms with the fact that establishing ontogenetic stages for every specimen in a given uh, taxon is horrifically impractical. Yeah, it is.
Is a mess, with layers of uncertainty and different definitions. Let's explore a few options. The first definition of adult is an animal that has reached sexual maturity. That is, it's able to successfully reproduce. The problem is that it's nearly impossible to identify sexual maturity from fossil bones, so this standard is all but useless. The second is an animal that shows considerable fusion of sutures within bones, especially skull bones and vertebrae. That would indicate that skeletal growth, on a practical level, is completed. However, that morphological characteristic isn't explicitly tied to a specific growth stage or age, making it a wee bit vague when it comes to establishing actual maturity. The third is by examining the spacing of growth rings in the bones, known as lags or lines of arrested growth. An individual is considered fully grown when the lags are extremely close together and the bone around them decreases in vascularization, or how many blood vessels are in the outer bone layers. That indicates a cessation of skeletal growth typically associated with maturity. Using growth rings definitely appears to be the best method. The only problem is that it requires in-depth analysis of a specimen's internal bone structure, which A, is not often practical, and B, has only been conducted on a handful of Tyrannosaurus specimens.
Yeah, the memes he's using sometimes within the video while talking completely seriously. Yeah, it cracks me up within.
Not to mention its potential competitors. That means that whatever the standard, the vast majority of specimens we'd be using to compare would have uncertain ages and growth stages, making an apples-to-apples comparison impossible. We could resolve that problem by simply including every T-Rex specimen, including the ones we know aren't adults, but that just causes more issues by making Tyrannosaurus appear much smaller on average than it actually would be when mature. The smallest T-Rex specimen that has strong evidence for being skeletally mature is Trix, RGM 792000. This specimen, displayed in the Netherlands, is estimated to weigh between 8 and 9 metric tons based on 3D scan data. Other skeletally mature specimens include MOR 1152, which has no measurements that I could find, Scotty, typically reconstructed as 10 to 11 tons, and Sue, also typically reconstructed as 10 to 11 tons, but I've observed to be larger than Scotty when using the same measurement standards. Cope appears to be larger and older than any of them at 30 plus years old and 11 to 12 tons. Goliath is even bigger, but has had no histology done, so we'll exclude it. This would result in a histology-backed, fully grown average of about 10.3 tons, with the caveat that Goliath is probably fully grown as well. Including that monster brings it up to 10.7 tons, but for the sake of the video, let's not. So we've got a fully grown T-Rex adult of just over 10 tons. Is that a fair comparison for the animals we're about to discuss? No. Why not? Because their histology may not be as well understood as T-Rex, and their sample size is much smaller. So again, it's an apples and oranges comparison. We're taking this then on a case-by-case basis. Anybody who says they know for certain that one of the following theropods is bigger or smaller than T-Rex on average is, quite frankly, either blowing smoke or has access to databases that any sane paleontologist would drool to publish. That's why this video...
Yeah. Probably smoking crack, as he already said in his own words. So which theropods are definitely bigger than Tyrannosaurus? Which theropods could be bigger than Tyrannosaurus? Yeah, that's the actual question, because the sample size for Tyrannosaurus compared to Spinosaurus, compared to Giganotosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, or other Tyrannosaurs like Suching Tyrannus, Megaraptorans, Zebellisaurs, and other megalosaurs, they don't have that sample size for that specific genus, but we have that big of a sample size for Tyrannosaurus, of course. Allosaurus has a big sample size, but we know that Saurophaganex is probably only 6 point something metric tons. Or not Saurophaganex, to be honest, Allosaurus annex now.
It was called which theropods could be bigger than Tyrannosaurus, not which theropods are definitively larger than Tyrannosaurus. With that in mind, let's go to our first contender, the Quechod sauropod Carcharodontosaurid. This is either a sauropod dorsal vertebra, likely the last or second to last in the series, or a Carcharodontosaurid axis, and it was found in China in 1944. It was identified as a sauropod originally, but both Mickey Mortimer and Darius Now pointed out some anatomical similarities to Carcharodontosaurid vertebrae. It's quite large. It's 17 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters long. Proportionally, that's interesting, since Curie and Carpenter in 1999 indicated that carnosaur vertebrae are typically longer than they are wide, so the idea that it's a Carcharodontosaurid at all is pretty iffy to begin with. It's 84% longer and 48% wider than the same vertebra in the Acrocanthosaurus specimen SMU 74646, which lived at approximately the same time. These proportions don't seem very Carcharodontosaurid to me, but hey. Scaling from a 10.5 meter acro would yield 16 meters long from vertebral width and 19 meters long from vertebral length, with a heavy...
Jesus Christ, that can't be true. 60 to 90 meters from Cretaceous China. Nah, man, this would be like a 15 to 20 plus ton animal. Metric ton, of course.
Heavy caveat that the material probably isn't closely related to Acrocanthosaurus and wouldn't be good to scale from it. Given the Quechovert's shaky at best identity, I'd consider this challenger's chances at dethroning the king to be very low. It's probably a sauropod. Next up is another big fragment from China, the infamous Camp's theropod. I'd recommend checking out Darknix's recent video including Camp's theropod, which has a great breakdown of the animal. Most of this section references his work. He worked with the University of California to examine the material of this fragmentary giant, which consisted of a partial femur shaft and a partial ischium. I hate that word. The material is quite large, with the estimates for femur length and circumference at 1.4 meters and 58 centimeters respectively, although the problem of uncertain identity remains. Camp's theropod could belong to a 6.8 ton 12 meter Synraptor, a 13.8 meter 7.2 ton young Schwannosaurus gigong...
Wait. Again, the size estimates. The Synraptor is crazy, 6.8 ton.
Respectively, although the problem of uncertain identity remains. Camp's theropod could belong to a 6.8 ton 12 meter Synraptor, a 13.8 meter 7.2 ton young Schwannosaurus gigongensis, or a 15 meter 12.6 ton young Schwannosaurus shung...
12 ton young Schwannosaurus. Honestly, my Carnosaur glazing would go through the roof.
That's quite the range, which makes sense given how scrappy the material is. There's no denying that it's a big animal at the very least, with even the lowest end estimates putting it as comparable to a small Tyrannosaurus, and the highest making it a beast in the same territory as Cope and Goliath. If you average out the possible reconstructions, you get a huge animal anyway at 13.6 meters and 8.8 tons, although that isn't how it works phylogenetically. Camp's theropod, with a huge disclaimer given how bad the material is, was very likely Tyrannosaurus-sized. Ah, Gomez, you weasel. Gomez is the nickname for a partial middle caudal...
Hey, why is it an S now? I think it was a C for Gomez.
From the Marfa information of Brazil, thought to have Carcharodontosaurid affinities. The specimen, NHM PVR 2129b, was described in Banderia et al. 2024. a paper highlighting dinosaur bones originally collected nearly 200 years ago. The authors admitted that it lacked diagnostic features that enabled confident assignment to either Carcharodontosauridae or Megaraptora, but noted that Megaraptorans typically have pneumatic verts and this specimen did not. Out of the two options then, it was more likely to be a carc. It's undoubtedly a huge caudal vert at 22.5 centimeters long and 17.1 centimeters wide. That's 40% longer than the biggest Acrocanthosaurus mid-caudal, which would scale the animal to 16.1 meters long and 18.3 tons. Gomez is 70% wider than the biggest Acro mid-caudal, getting you 19.6 meters and 33.5 tons.
What's the problem with these fragmentary remains? You see the scaling or the size estimates you get for this animal. This is an animal closely in size to Disney's dinosaurs Carnotaurus. That's how big the scaling gets this animal. It's a comparable size now to Disney's dinosaurs Carnotaurus, so that's outrageous.
There are huge problems with this scaling. One, Acrocanthosaurus is incredibly bulky for a Carcharodontosaurid, so it's the most liberal choice to make for scaling. Two, it's uncertain if Gomez is a carc to begin with, and the vert is quite damaged, making positive identification even more difficult. Three, scaling from actual South American carcs that lived close to the same time, like Lajas venator, yields much smaller sizes. Lajas venator was about 3.5 meters long, and the holotype's largest mid-caudal centrum was 6.7 centimeters long and 3.86 centimeters wide. That would yield 11.7 meters for Gomez based on centrum length and 15.5 meters based on width. Still enormous. I do think it's important to mention that Gomez's width-length ratio does not resemble that of contemporary Carcharodontosaurids at all and is closer to Megaraptorans, but is still so wacky that anything we scale it from is likely to be massively erroneous. Whatever.
It seems like this would be a more slim Carcharodontosaur or a big Megaraptoran. I hope it's the latter.
Megaraptorans, but is still so wacky that anything we scale it from is likely to be massively erroneous. Whatever Gomez was, it was big, but we have no real idea of what kind of animal it even belonged to or what its proportions were. I'm giving this a possible but unlikely rating for now given the complete lack of information. We're finally moving on to actually named taxa with Carcharodontosaurus, a giant from Cretaceous North Africa. It's an iconic animal with an entire family named after it, but is unfortunately quite fragmentary. Carcharodontosaurus saharicus consists only of a 1.6 meter partial skull without any postcranial material to speak of. Based on more complete relatives, you can reasonably arrive at anywhere from 7 to 8.5 metric tons for the animal, putting it as somewhat comparable to adult Tyrannosaurus, while still notably lighter. I personally think the higher end is more likely given how freaking enormous the skull is. Again, it's a specimen that lacks the most useful bones for actual body mass estimation, so there really isn't much to discuss here.
Yeah, obviously, but we still have bigger carcs.
This one gets a low rating. Zushinktyrannus magnus has come a long way in the megatheropod rank since it was described back in 2011. It's a heavily built tyrannosaurian, but the holotype consisted of only a maxilla and dentary, even worse material than Carcharodontosaurus. For over a decade, it appeared to float somewhere in the 4 to 5 ton range, with Twitter posts hinting at larger material. In August 2025, a research team with paleontologists from the United States, Australia, and China teamed up with the Zhusheng Dinosaur Cultural Research Center. They measured and described new material, and some of that information was leaked to the Chinese national press and misrepresented. The research team asked me to clear things up with my video from a few weeks ago, and I'll present the basics again here. This and more will be published soon, but they've given me permission to share this much. First, there's the holotype, ZCDM V0031. This animal is typically understood to be about 10 meters and 4 to 5 tons. Then there's a dentary larger than that of the holotype, as well as a maxilla smaller than that of the holotype. You all know how I feel about fragmentary skull scaling, so we'll say that each of those individuals are likely broadly comparable to the holotype. The same quarry also yielded a small femur and tibia, 89 and 95 centimeters long respectively. We're still not in Rex territory yet. A much bigger femur was referred by Rommel's team to the holotype. It measures 1.21 meters long from the femoral head to the lateral condyle, comparable to subadult T-Rex specimens. Their mass estimate for the holotype, including that material, is 6 tons. We do reach Rex sizes with a scapula from Longoujian, which is 89 centimeters long while damaged. That's comparable to scapulas from T-Rex specimens like Trix and MOR 555. We could be looking at an 8+ ton animal here, but that requires Zhusheng and T-Rex to have identical proportions. The crazy stuff happens with the Zhusheng specimen, which was teased on Twitter for years. Rommel's team relocated and measured the gigantic dorsal vertebra, which they identified as a D13 after physical examination and 3D scanning. They asked me not to share the centrum length, although I can say it's comparable to that of the T-Rex specimen Scotty's D13. The Zhusheng vert is 28 centimeters wide, which is 3.7% wider than the T-Rex holotype, 27% wider than the Giga holotype, not that scaling between families means much, 15% wider than the T-Rex Stan, 7.7% wider than Scotty, and 1.5% skinnier than Sue's.
Yeah, Sue is around 10 metric tons, so that's probably a ranking of possible for Zhusheng-Tyrannus.
We absolutely see some variability in vert width between individuals, though. The T-Rex holotype, for example, is a smaller specimen than Scotty, but has a slightly larger D13. I wouldn't consider it responsible to outright claim that this Zhusheng specimen is definitively bigger than Scotty, but it's disingenuous to say that it isn't T-Rex sized. My original estimate for the animal was 9 to 10 metric tons, but the research team provided a range of 9 to 11 tons. More information on that after November 2025. Obviously, most of the Zhusheng specimens we've found are not comparable to mature T-Rex specimens, but histology hasn't been done on them. Their growth stages for now are a mystery, as is the case for the majority of other challengers for the Megatheropod throne. We're giving Zhusheng Tyrannis a solid chance rating for now. Watch this space for more updates. That brings us to Spinosaurus aegypticus. What a beautiful, bizarre creature. The subadult neotype, made famous in 2014, is about 11.4 meters long and likely weighed at least 3,400 kilograms. Obviously, that's nowhere near T-Rex size, but it's also not fully grown. Tantalizing fragments of bigger specimens exist, like the NHM UK dentary and MSNM rostrum. Skull fragment scaling is always a mess, but these individuals may have been between 14 and 15 meters long and weighed between 7.5 and 8.5 plus tons, which is certainly comparable to adult Tyrannosaurus. There is another recently described referred specimen, which I've mostly ignored until now thanks to its terrible quality, but in a video about speculative fragmentary giants, I can't really justify skipping over it. In May 2025, Andrea Cao and Alessandro Paterna published a review of giant North African theropods. In their paper, they described a huge partial phalanx, or toe bone, that they assigned to Spinosaurus. It's 145% larger than the corresponding bone in the 11.4 meter subadult, which you could scale if you really wanted, to a 16.5 meter, 10.3 plus ton giant. It's not a hill I'd recommend dying on, though. Toe bone scaling might be even worse than skull fragment scaling. At any rate, although the material is total crap, Spinosaurus definitely has specimens that could be as big as some Tyrannosaurus adults.
I think that should be the specimen from the HK formation of Niger, maybe. But the fact that there is now a specimen that is over 16 meters in length is quite intriguing. It's intriguing aspect.
Overall, that's a decent chance based on known material, but given how water can ease the burdens of mass, I wouldn't be surprised if Spinosaurus could end up being quite a bit larger than calculated here. Deinocheirus mirificus is the dark horse contender. The Mongolian hunchback duck was fully described in 2014 and may have been a huge omnivore that ate water plants and small animals. The specimen IGM 100-127 is a big animal, typically estimated at around 7 metric tons and 11 to 12 meters long. That's already comparable to a small or subadult Tyrannosaurus rex, but otherwise nothing to write home about. The reason it's on this list of giants known from sketchy material is a possible ulna from Suzuki et al. 2010. I cannot for the life of me find the original paper, but it's mentioned in Theropod Facts and Figures by Molina Perez and Laramendi. They scaled its owner to 16 meters and 16 tons, but also mentioned that they thought it was too big to be a Deinocheirus ulna and may have been some other type of long bone. Deinocheirus, I think, has an excellent chance ecologically to be the biggest theropod, given how it was omnivorous and didn't need to be especially fast or agile. It could pack on the pounds as a predator deterrent, although I haven't found solid evidence to suggest that the giant Deinocheirus ulna is in fact a giant Deinocheirus ulna. Based on good material, it's not adult T-Rex sized, but we'll give it a decent chance based on its ecology and diet. And finally, we arrive at the king of the south, Giganotosaurus carolinii. Billed as a top
Rhinoceros I did not have on the radar, but this guy I did have.
contender for the Megatheropod throne ever since its discovery in 1993, Giga is a fan favorite. It's actually remarkably complete for a Carcharodontosaurid as well, with nearly 80% of its bones preserved in the holotype. The material on display in Argentina is almost entirely original, with only the skull, feet, and part of the arms being complete reconstructions. The Giganotosaurus holotype has been reconstructed by quite a few different researchers over the past 3 decades based on measurements from the literature, and I'm pleased to say that the research team I work with was able to share scans of the holotype and the mount with me for this video. These images are comparing the holotype mount to mounts of various T-Rex specimens so you can get an idea for how it stacks up. With a caveat, the Giga mount and pose are a bit weird, with some portions not reflecting the measurements for the actual known material, so these comparative sizes and narration are backed up using the original bones. The skull recon is also outdated. Any one of these mounts may be subject to updates in the future, so please don't hold that against me. This is the best we have to work with. Histology for most of these Rex specimens is missing, but several, like Tristan Otto, are believed to be subadults based on morphology. The pose of the Giga mount here is awkward, so its skull would likely be higher off the ground, but in terms of overall skeletal dimensions, you can see it's larger than some subadult T-Rex specimens like Thomas, and comparable to young adult or small T-Rex specimens like Huxley, Tristan Otto, Arwen, and Trix. It's smaller than Stan, MOR 555, MOR 980, the projected recon of LACM 23844, Scotty, and Sue. This isn't counting the fragmentary giants like Cope and Goliath, which would be even bigger. But Giganotosaurus dwarfs Fran, the biggest Acrocanthosaurus. Volumetric analyses incorporating 3D scans of the original material have the Giga holotype as quite a hefty animal, about 12 meters long and 8,000 to 8,500 kilograms. Whether or not it's completely done growing is up for debate, as the specimen displays closing of sutures, but that's not a perfect indicator of maturity in Carnosaurs.
Now he's gonna mention the Giga chin specimen.
It's definitely comparable to the smaller adult T-Rex individuals like Trix, and larger than 2 famous specimens, like Amon H5027 and CM9380. Without more information, it certainly counts as a Rex-sized individual, although the idea of the Giganotosaurus holotype being the size of a big Rex seems based in inconsistent measurement standards. When looking at scans of the material, it's clear that it's been the victim of inflated numbers, like femur length, which is often cited at numbers that can only be reached by measuring at a diagonal angle or over the curves. When using the same standards, Giga is comparable to small T-Rexes. It's also worth pointing out that we might be reconstructing Carcharodontosaur neck muscles as too large and Tyrannosaur neck muscles as too small. There's also the infamous dentary referred to Giganotosaurus, which is cited varyingly at 2 to 6% larger than that of the holotype. As we may have learned by now, skull fragment scaling is notoriously variable in theropods, particularly jaw material. The dentary owner could be the same size as the holotype, could be larger, could even be slightly smaller. To be parsimonious, I'm inclined to accept that it's larger, but I'm automatically suspicious of size estimates based on skull material alone. The lower estimates seem far more likely given how the holotype is smaller than often thought. It's still a huge animal by any reasonable standard, and overall gets a solid chance of being as big as Tyrannosaurus given the staggering difference in sample size. I'll have to be honest though, I'm rooting for a giant Megaraptoran relative to come out of nowhere and steal the top spot indisputably so we can stop arguing about it.
Yeah, I. This would be so good. Imagine like the Death Slicer, the Death Ripper of dinosaurs. If Chilantosaurus gets definitely assigned to Megaraptora, imagine. It would be absolute cinema. It would be bigger than Mype. It would be comparable and maybe even outsize many Carcharodontosaurus in the process.
Plus, the more I learn about Megaraptorans, the higher they climb the ladder of my favorite dinosaurs. Have you seen Mape? Have you seen a Rostion or Megaraptor or Orcaraptor? These things are overwhelmingly cool. Give me a 15-meter Megaraptoran, please, with exquisite preservation while you're at it. What theropod do you think has the... Give me a 15-meter Megaraptoran, please, with exquisite preservation while you're at it.
Yeah, this but a 15 Megaraptoran with current animals like my Orcaraptor, Earastian, Megaraptor, even Raptor, which his remains are horrid, is very unlikely. It would be something you would see in a non paleo accurate series like Primeval, which is some time ago actually, which launched way back. But that would be an animal for this kind of video.
What theropod do you think has the best chance of being the biggest? Tyrannosaurus has a clear advantage thanks to its much larger sample size, which gives it the biggest specimens overall in the form of Sioux, Cope, and Goliath, but perhaps any one of the other theropods we talked about today would be even bigger with a comparable number of specimens. Only more
Yeah, Tyrannotitan, Acrocanthosaurus, and Meraxes gigas were not talked about as much. Of course, I think
any one of the other theropods we talked about today would be even bigger with a comparable number of specimens. Only more.
yeah, they all range somewhere from 6 to 8 plus metric tons. Tyrannotitan, maybe not because the supposed biggest specimens remains are horrid as well. So yeah, let's see. But if it was so, personally, it has to be a Tyrannosaur, probably because of the bulky builds. That's the biggest land predator of all time. If not a Tyrannosaur, it would have to be a Carcharodontosaur. If it was a Megaraptor, and as I already said, I'll hold my hands up. It would be absolute cinema. So next up, I'm not gonna go with The Truth of Pet Evolution by Benji Thomas. I think that's probably gonna be something for next time, but I'm staying on the Vividend track. I'm vibing with this shit. So I'm definitely gonna do the next Vividend video with prehistory's most extreme natural weapons. We're looking at Triceratops in the thumbnail. And this is going to be very interesting. Also, Vividan is one YouTuber that portrays this image of nature is metal better than anyone else. I can say so. As I said, I'm vibing with this.
Prehistoric animals are known for their bizarre adaptations, often unreal. Prehistoric animals are known.
So why do I have no audio?
Prehistoric animals are known for their bizarre adaptations, often entries in the paper.
Let's see. Now it should be working again. No, absolutely not. Uh, there it is.
Their bizarre adaptations, often of today's conversation. We'll be covering prehistoric animals. Prehistoric animals are known for their bizarre adaptations, often unreal body size, and incredible diversity. Some of those adaptations include defensive and offensive weapons, the topic of today's conversation. We'll be covering prehistoric animals' most extreme weapons, starting with the dangerous but relatively benign entries in the paper-cut tier. We'll take things up a notch with the serious threat tier, and cover the biological equivalents of a nuclear option with the overkill tier, discussing how these amazing animals would utilize their specialized structures in defense, hunting, and competition. Academic sources are in the description. First up is the paper-cut tier, which includes animal weaponry that is certainly dangerous but represents the floor for this video. We begin with the spiked frontal appendages of Anomalocaris, a 1.5 foot long apex predator from the Cambrian. Anomalocaris was a radiodont, a group of marine arthropods with a circular crushing mouth called an oral cone. It was thought for many years to have hunted trilobites with its frontal appendages by crushing their armor with its spikes, but the lack of damage or mineralized content on said spikes cast that hypothesis into question. A 2023 biomechanical study suggested instead that Anomalocaris would have been an open water pursuit predator that hunted fast, soft-bodied prey. Its appendages were flexible and could extend and contract quickly, but wouldn't have been able to pierce trilobite armor as long believed. Still, they're formidable-looking structures and deserve a place on the list. Another set of weapons recently demoted by biomechanical analysis are the hand claws of Therizinosaurus, an herbivorous megatheropod from late Cretaceous Mongolia. In the early 2000s,
Yeah, put the fries in the bag, bro. Put the fries in the bag.
was popularly depicted as a Freddy Krueger slasher villain of an herbivore that used its enormous claws like knives to defend itself against Tarbosaurus. That actually continued on into 2022 with it stabbing all the way through Giganotosaurus's neck in Jurassic World Dominion. Unfortunately, neither of those depictions seem realistic in the wake of Chi Natal 2023, which used finite element analysis to stress test various Alvarezsaur and Therizinosaur claws. Turns out Therizinosaurus's claws were so long that they weren't as combat viable as thought, instead serving as a decorative tool for intraspecific display, hooks for grabbing vegetation, or simply looking scary to predators. Still, from the perspective of a human, a 3-foot-long claw is absolutely horrifying. It would still take you out pretty easily and do damage to attackers. That's the end of natural weapons that weren't as dangerous as we thought. It's all crazy.
Yeah. But damage to a human-sized attacker, I can hear it, of course, but damage to a Tarbosaurus-sized attacker, probably not that much.
Stuff from here on out, even within the rest of the paper cut tier. The bite and claws of Velociraptor, a 14 to 20 kilogram dromaeosaur, may have been relatively small but could do serious damage. Velociraptor also lived in late Cretaceous Mongolia and was first found in the flaming cliffs of the Chodokta Formation in 1923. According to Sakamoto 2022, it had a relatively low bite force of 304 Newton, which is still comparable to modern cheetahs according to Rowe 2007. Its skull was long and thin, lined with small, curved teeth, perfect for snapping up small prey, and its iconic sickle claws could have been used to pin down small animals as it ate them alive. They may have also performed a defensive function, as seen in the fighting dinosaur specimen, in which a velociraptor pinned down by a protoceratops has its sickle claw hooked in the ceratopsian's throat. We don't know who started this scrap, but it's clear that even the ancient herbivores of the Cretaceous were not to be messed with. Speaking of primitive ceratopsians, the bite of Udanoceratops was formidable in its own right. Udanoceratops was yet another denizen of late Cretaceous Mongolia.
His mouth, boys. Ah, you can get your bone snapped in half. Maybe even your whole leg. Yeah, this is some nightmare shit.
Which seemed really good at producing an incredible diversity of amazingly terrifying animals. It was about the size of a cow, at 3 to 4 meters or 9 to 12 feet long, and weighing 700 kilograms, or 1,500 pounds. It had the superficially parrot-like skull shape common to many leptoceratopsids, but overbuilt to an absurd degree. Its mandible, or upper jaw, was thick and robust, and its dentary resembled a curved guillotine blade. That powerful bite would have been useful for harvesting tough plants as well as self-defense, both against predators and competing members of its own species. I'm not one of those paleo-Twitter bros that thinks every herbivorous animal is secretly a raging maniac, but I'll say this, don't mess with herbivores just because they eat plants, especially ceratopsians. Our last entry in the paper cut tier is rather broad, saber-teeth. We see saber-teeth develop in multiple clades throughout time, some only distantly related. The first are my favorites, the Gorgonopsians. These non-mammalian synapsids lived in the Permian period and were terrestrial apex predators before dinosaurs were even an idea. The biggest in
The crazy thing is here that this is the first tier.
Transcevia grew to about 350 kilograms, or 770 pounds. Its 6-inch, 15-centimeter canines were robust and serrated, capable of piercing scales and flesh of the cow-sized brachiosaurs it lived with, as well as similar-sized prey to themselves. Their columnar stance and symmetrical feet would have made them fast runners. Even though their skull structures led to relatively weak bite forces, Gorgonopsians still would have been able to puncture bone, according to Ben Wantall 2021. Saber-toothed cats, and cat-like saber-tooths, filled broadly similar niches in the Cenozoic. They had decently strong bites with wide gapes, along with powerful forelimbs built for grappling. Also, a lot of animals that the public would recognize as saber-toothed cats aren't even cats. Nimravids, which include Barbara felids, are outside of the true cat group Felidae, but convergently evolved very similar builds and hunting styles. Even within true cats, we have the Metylerini like Dinophelus, the Smylodontini like Smilodon, the very heavily built Homotherine Mechairodontines like Amphimechairodus, and the more slender Homotherines like Homotherium. This shows how useful the saber-tooth grappler build is for taking down cow-sized plus prey across time, given how isotopic studies show that Smilodon fatalis was eating the enormous Bison antiquus. Their combination of saber teeth and claws was great for hunting animals larger than themselves, especially given how mechanical recreations of big saber-toothed cats indicate that biting the throats of big animals would have been the most efficient way of taking down their prey. On the
If it was how efficient an animal could kill, a prehistoric animal could kill a human, these animals in the paper cut here would be way higher because they're in the size range. There you have the weaponry to kill humans.
topic of prehistoric weaponry, my epic fantasy novel Obsidian Dawn is now available as an ebook and hardcover. You can find it on Amazon, Ingram Spark, and Kobo. Obsidian Dawn is the first in a trilogy covering a war between the Aztecs and Carthage, but both sides have
Yeah, check that out, guys, if you're interested.
psychic dinosaurs. Links will be in the pinned comment. Onto the serious threat tier. Himalayasaurus tibetensis was one of the biggest predatory animals in the history of the planet. This 15-meter, 35-ton ichthyosaur lived in the late Triassic period and had massive serrated teeth, laterally compressed like a theropod dinosaur's. We don't know exactly what the back of its skull looked like, but the interior portion preserved gives us an idea of a gigantic, powerfully built animal. It's not higher on this list because of its fragmentary nature, but Himalayasaurus would have been able to prey on just about anything other than even bigger predatory ichthyosaurs. And if the recent discovery of stealth-enhancing structures on the fins of Pteranodontosaurus is any indication, then Himalayasaurus may have been a deep-water ambush predator as well, which is a horrifying thought. Eurypterids, informally referred to as sea scorpions despite not being scorpions and also including a significant number of freshwater species, are amazing. They include some of the biggest and most heavily armored arthropods in Earth's long and glorious history of arthropods. A specific group, the pterygonids, developed long, grasping chelicerae claws for prey capture. The biggest of them were about 2.5 meters long, not including the claws, and would have weighed several hundred kilograms, so their chelicerae would have been like wood saws that could close around their prey. Interestingly, their claws were the only parts of their body that were heavily mineralized, indicating that the rest of their armor was extremely thin in order to allow for their exoskeleton to function properly, even underwater. Eurypterids may have reached the largest size biologically possible for arthropods. Pretty amazing if you ask me. Ceratopsian horns are next. Well,
And Eurypterids is also another thing you probably only encounter in a nightmare as a human.
Ceratopsian horns are next. Well, the ones that were likely used for combat anyway. I'm not talking about the absolutely gorgeous, while non-combat applicable structures that we see on the frills of ceratopsians like Lokiceratops or Cosmoceratops. We're talking sword horns like the ones we find on Triceratops, Coeloceratops, Torosaurus, Machairoceratops, Styracosaurus. Heck, even the sharpened spikes we find above the nasal boss in Pachyrhinosaurus lacusi. While the prevailing hypothesis is that these structures originally evolved as a form of sexual display, that doesn't mean they didn't also function as predator defense and interspecific competition tools. A 2023 study concluded that the placement of Triceratops horns, for example, along with injuries and skull bones of the species, indicated that they likely locked horns and stabbed each other in the face in order to establish dominance. Other ceratopsians would have had unique horn-locking positions according to their skull structures, and others, like those with nasal bosses or a single horn, may have engaged in flank ramming to inflict maximum damage. On to bear claws. And I'm not referring to the pastry. Modern bears like grizzlies can have claws 5 to 10 centimeters or 2 to 4 inches long. Giant prehistoric bears like Arctodus simus would have had comparable weaponry, although since they weren't as adapted for digging, their claws wouldn't have been as long. Their claws were powerful and sharp, however, and backed up by 600 to 1,000 kilograms of muscle, could have dealt out absurd damage to rivals or unlucky victims. Don't forget about their teeth either. Being an omnivore doesn't mean that these bears had weak bites, and their canines were sharp and thick. Arctodus simus would have been Leonardo DiCaprio's worst nightmare. Megaraptoran hand claws were another serious threat, especially for human-sized prey animals. Megaraptorans have huge curved ungual phalanges or finger bones that included claws. They curved.
So if Megaraptor hand claws are in the serious threat tier, then the likes of Tyrannosaur teeth and Carcharodontus or Carnosaur teeth will be probably at least one tier higher up.
Down and inward, excellent for capturing prey like gigantic fish hooks. In Megaraptor proper, the hand claws are about a foot long, or 30 centimeters. That's not including the keratin sheath that it would have had in life. Megaraptor itself is far from the biggest member of the clade. That honor, at least for now, likely goes to Maib macrothorax, whose genus name means cold wind of the shadow of death. It's named for an evil spirit from Ionicank or Tehuelche mythology. Maib was about 9 to 10 meters long and would have weighed about 3 tons. While the claws from the specimen weren't preserved, they likely would have been even larger than in Megaraptor, which was a third of the weight. I'm of the opinion that, if you were to get teleported back in time to the Cretaceous, Megaraptorans would be one of the dinosaurs most interested in eating you. We can't have a video on prehistoric weaponry and not mention the pinning claws of the large dromaeosaurs, in particular Utahraptor. Utahraptor is quite robust for a dromaeosaur, with a thick, short skull and large clawed arms. It's also the size of a polar bear, with 24 cm sickle claws in the largest specimens. One popular idea on how that would have been used is the raptor prey restraint model, which is that the claws would pierce and pin down struggling prey while the raptor ate it alive. A potential flaw with that model that's been pointed out in the comments of a previous video is how modern birds of prey that engage in such behavior typically have a rear-oriented and well-developed hallux to ensure a strong grip. Perhaps the sickle claw filled that role given its large size compared to other toe claws and dromaeosaurs, but one thing's for sure, we always need to be incorporating new information to improve our models on ancient animal behavior. As the saying goes, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Before we start on tails, we have one more set of claws to highlight, Spinosaurus. While the holotype didn't preserve any arm material, referred specimens include several manual phalanges and unguals that proved to be quite intimidating. Large adults would have had claws about as long as an adult human's forearm, perfect weapons for capturing and gutting the enormous fish that they lived with in Cretaceous North Africa. Shunosaurus was a sauropod that lived in China during the Jurassic period. While quite small for a sauropod at just over 9 meters and about 3 tons, it made up for its diminutive size with its fierce tail club.
For talking about tail clubs, obviously Shunosaurus is one of the most outlandish animals to ever evolve. Sauropod with a tail club, deep it. Claws, getting back to claws, it's an evolutionary hunting concept that worked out so well because it convergently involved in so many animal groups, even as you already saw, Spinosaurus, large-bodied dromaeosaurs, small-bodied dromaeosaurs, Megaraptorans, and you could even name Carcharodontosaurus and Neovenatorid as well as many other theropods. So claws, a fantastic concept, even in modern birds of prey, a fantastic hunting concept.
Lump of bone had 2-inch or 5-centimeter spikes growing from it that would have done significant damage to any predators unwise enough to attempt attacking it from behind. It lived with small metriacanthosaurs like Synraptor, and larger taxa like the Indian elephant-sized young Tyrannosaurus, which was its most likely natural predator. Jurassic China was wild. Tail clubs go to the next level with Ankylosaurus, the 4-ton living tank from Maastrichtian North America. If you're an herbivore coexisting with Tyrannosaurus, you need to be crazy fast, crazy offensive, or crazy defensive. Anky went for the last option with a body covered in thick bone plating, along with a fused tail club 1/2 meter or 1.5 wide. It's basically walking around with a small boulder, ready to thwack the shins of anybody trying to mess with it. The club was held straight by the fusion of 7 caudal vertebrae preceding it, which together acted like a natural handle to keep the club and tail level, despite its immense weight. Stegosaurus from South America took a very different approach. This wee little ankylosaur lived in Patagonia during the late Cretaceous, and instead of a hammer-like tail club, sported a maquis-like tailed sword club. It's almost as if evolution itself is reminding you that Aztecs and dinosaurs go together. Crazy. Anyway, Stegosaurus was a small dinosaur, about the size of a medium dog, and likely used its sharpened tail osteoderms as a threat display and effective weapon. The tip of the tail weapon was stiff, but
So if we have ankylosaurs in this tier, we might have ankylosaurs another tier up, like Gastonia, with its like a sharp plates on each flank.
And likely used its sharpened tail osteoderms as a threat display and effective weapon. The tip of the tail weapon was stiff, but the tail itself would have been able to move back and forth to strike enemies on either side of Stegosaurus. I really hope we find more animals with this type of defensive weapon. We made it to the overkill tier! I don't know if that's a good thing, given the intimidating name, but here we are. We're starting off hot with Stegosaur Thagamizers. These meter-long tail spikes get their name from the legendary Far Side cartoon, in which a stylized caveman named Thag Simmons is reported to have been killed by a Stegosaurian assault. The name stuck, and now that's what pretty much everybody has called them since the 80s. And while Thagamizers themselves are formidable, shown to be able to pierce bone and brutalize Allosaurus specimens, a huge part of what makes them dangerous goes beyond the spikes themselves. Stegosaurs are shown to have an incredible range of motion with their tails, as displayed in Malice in 2010 with Kentrosaurus. They could swing their tails to the side to the point that they were facing forward, resembling an herbivorous multi-ton scorpion. Add to that the Stegosaur itself changing angles and turning to face any attackers, and it's little wonder why we have so many Allosaurus skeletons with horrible injuries. Anodontosaurus opts for bludgeoning damage. While not as large as its relative Ankylosaurus, Anodontosaurus has a club tail that makes its more famous cousin cry with envy. The club is wide and thick, but with pointed pyramidal edges like a gigantic sledgehammer. If Ankylosaurus uses Mjolnir, Anodontosaurus is equipped with Stormbreaker. The smaller surface area of its spike-like club edge would act as a force multiplier, crushing skin, muscle, and bone all at once. Anodontosaurus is known from the Dinosaur Park and Horseshoe Canyon formations of Canada, and would have defended itself against predators like the 2 to 4 ton Gorgosaurus, 1 to 3 ton Albertosaurus, and 3 to 4 ton Daspletosaurus. If you live alongside fast, bone-crushing Tyrannosaurs, one of the best solutions is to become a bone crusher yourself.
Yeah. Offense is the best defense, and you have to kill your enemy with his own weapons, I guess, after these two concepts. So, it's crazy how Thyreophorans, by the way, like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, how many different types of defense mechanisms they have evolved, and how many entries they have on this list.
Have another Cenozoic entry with Pseudodonta. specifically the wicked horns of Coelodonta antiquitatis, the famous woolly rhinoceros. It only went extinct about 10,000 to 14,000 years ago and was one of the most formidable animals to roam Pleistocene Eurasia. At up to 2+ metric tons, it was a muscular herbivore that could back up its wicked 1.5-meter nasal horn with serious force. The horn itself was more thin and blade-like than modern rhinoceros horns, giving it a unique morphology within its clade. A hit from something like that could gash open just about any predator that Coelodonta could have encountered in the Pleistocene. But some earlier predators were specially adapted for hunting horned creatures 5 times Coelodonta's size. That brings us to the jaws of the tyrant lizard king, which had the strongest bite of any land animal known in the history of the planet. The most recent bite force study that included T-Rex, Sakamoto 2022, calculated that Stan, a decently sized, possibly adult T-Rex, would have bitten down with a force of 24,000 newtons at the front of the jaws.
48,000 newtons at the posterior bite force, almost 5
Where
tons.
the force was weakest. The rear bite force goes up to 48,000 newtons. Even larger specimens could have bitten in the 60 to 70,000 newton range. For reference, a 2021 study found that bone-crushing bites start between 1 and 3,000 newtons, forces that T-Rex was likely achieving as a baby. Its jaws were optimized for seizing prey and shaking it, with large, D-shaped teeth that could pierce and hold structures like ceratopsian horns and frills. HAP 2008 reports a bitten-off Triceratops horn, showing that T-Rex was perfectly willing to attack and damage dangerous prey by removing their defenses. We go back to the Cenozoic for a moment to highlight Didacurus, which had probably the nastiest tail club out there. It was robust and covered in huge spikes, and may have been used for intraspecific combat over mates as well as brutal predator defense. It's basically the Witch King's Morning Star, but on a disgruntled armadillo relative. The tail club was about the size of a human torso, not including the spikes, so one hit from this thing would just about pulverize any predators that Didacurus could have potentially encountered. Smilodon, Jello. Short-faced bear, Jello. Jaguar, Jello. You get the point, and so would they. Let's dive into the water to look at giant crocodilomorph jaws. I'm also including animals that aren't true crocodilians in this section, like the 9 to 10 meter Philetosaurus sarcosuchus and the enormous Phytosaur Smilosuchus. Animals in the semi-aquatic ambush predator niche tend to have fairly similar body plans, with short limbs, powerful tails, and bone-crushing jaws, unless you're gharials, which specialize in eating small fish. Purosaurus was the king of Miocene Brazil, with a wide, almost cartoon-like skull perfect for crushing large mammals into bits, and Deinosuchus was a terror in late Cretaceous North America. The very biggest pseudosuchians seem to cluster around the 10 to 11 meter and 5 to 7 ton mark, dwarfing even the largest saltwater crocodiles from today. But even they didn't have the biggest, meanest jaws in the Mesozoic. That honor probably goes to a pliosaur like Kronosaurus or Sachichosaurus, which were bobble-headed super carnivores that ruled the Jurassic and still had a significant presence in the early Cretaceous. Sachichosaurus was one of the very largest known from good material, at over 10 meters long and 15 tons, with a toothy skull 3 meters long. It could have swallowed a human whole, and would have used its jaws to crush and rip apart prey like elasmosaurids and giant turtles.
Such bulky animals, really, and one of the most terrifying heads and skulls to have ever evolved.
Fragments exist of even bigger pliosaurs, and you can learn about them by checking out my recent video on the subject. Spicamelus afer recently made headlines for basically being an awesome bro kaiju ankylosaur that also happened to really exist. In 2021, a dorsal rib with spiky osteoderms became the holotype for the genus and was thought to represent an African ankylosaur, but nobody was sure of what the rest of the animal looked like. Fast forward to 2025, and with a description of more material, it turns out that Spicamelus was a 5-meter hedgehog anguirus of an animal with spikes covering its neck, sides, back, hips, and tail. Its tail vertebrae were stiffened and fused into handle vertebrae, which indicate that the tail spikes it possessed could have been used somewhat like Stegosaurian thagamizers, albeit with less flexibility. The author suggested that its armor pulled double duty as predator defense and display, which makes perfect sense to me. If evolutionary pressure selects for a particular structure, it may very well have more than one function. Big sauropod stomps and tail slaps are next. While not explicitly weaponized structures in the same way as many of the other entries on this list, the feet and tails of big sauropods were devastatingly powerful. The sheer force exerted by a 40-ton Brachiosaurus or 90-ton Argentinosaurus would have been mind-numbing, whether it was stepping on you or slamming you into next week. As fully grown adults, many sauropods would have been immune to predation. There simply weren't any carnivores large enough to take them down. Livyatan melvillei had the largest teeth known of any animal. Period. While only known from a skull, this hypercarnivorous sperm whale relative was armed with sharp teeth a foot long, inside of jaws 3 meters long. Its actual body size is uncertain, given the complete lack of postcranial material, but by any standard it was a titan among marine predators. It would have hunted sharks and other whales, and even coexisted with Otodus megalodon. While recent discoveries and analyses indicate that this shark was likely more slim and elongate than traditionally reconstructed, it was still a gigantic predator. Adult megs range between 9 and 16 meters long, with large individuals pushing well over 30 metric tons, and the very largest record-breaking 1 in 20,000 individuals exceeding 24 meters and weighing nearly 100 tons. Their teeth were many and massive, with a broad shape and serrated edges. Bite force estimates for the megatooth shark range from 108,000 newtons for a large 47-ton individual to 182,000 newtons for a 103-ton exceptional individual. It must
It's almost 4 times stronger than Zeus bite here.
be noted, however, that those estimates originate from isometrically scaling up a great white shark, and that morphologically, Megalodon likely would have been more gracile. Bite force also doesn't quite scale isometrically, so more accurate estimates should be about a third lower, regardless of the phylogenetic controversy. Still, that's an absurdly powerful bite, which is nothing less than expected for the largest confirmed macropredator in the history of planet Earth. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out Extinction, Obsidian Dawn, and Ebo.
Yeah. as already said, check that out if you're interested. I guess we're going with another Vividin video then.
We all know the classic prehistoric battle of T-Rex versus Triceratops, the ultimate terrestrial carnivore against the freakishly agile sword tank. That's a fight that's dominated the public perception of dinosaurs for over 100 years, and for good reason. But what if I told you that Triceratops wasn't the biggest herbivore that T-Rex came into conflict with? Well, that is what I'm telling you right now. So let's talk about it. Edmontosaurus adnectens was a species of hadrosaurid that lived in the late Cretaceous of North America, with the closely related Edmontosaurus regalis only being known from Canada. E. adnectens is found in Canada as well as the north-central United States. They were also incredibly successful animals, with thousands of disarticulated specimens known from the Ruth Mason Quarry in South Dakota. They were numerous, certainly, but their high population didn't stop them from growing to be the size of elephants. A 2022 study found that an average fully grown Edmontosaurus adnectens would have weighed between 5 and 6 tons and would be 11 to 12 meters long, using a sample size of over 600 individuals. Of course, the maximum size is much larger, as you likely inferred from the title of this video. 2 record-breaking specimens are known that are probably Edmontosaurus adnectens, although if they turn out to be something different, they'd still be the biggest hadrosaurids known from North America by quite a bit. X-Rex, or MOR 1142, is an enormous 7.5 meter tail that would scale to a 14.3 meter, 13 plus ton behemoth. The other specimen is a maxilla known as Becky's giant that would result in a broadly similar range, although the material is much worse. So we go from average African bush elephant size to bigger than a Columbian mammoth, with not a lot of specimens in between. Odd. That's the taphonomic mess that is the fossil record, I suppose. Part of the secret to Edmontosaurus' success, both in population density and potential body size, was its teeth. They had hundreds of teeth at a time that grew in columns, forming leaf-shaped structures perfect for slicing and crushing plant matter in huge quantities. This shovel-it-down chewing approach enabled them to eat efficiently, so they could attain large sizes without sacrificing speed for fermentation chambers like sauropods. And they weren't just huge animals either, they were also likely fast-footed. Biomechanical analyses from 2007 and 2011 indicated that adults could gallop at a brisk 45 kilometers an hour or 28 miles an hour, with subadults really booking it at up to 57 kilometers or 35 miles an hour. It wouldn't surprise me if they were faster than that in life, given how biomechanical simulations are limited to preserved material. Any soft tissue structures that may have allowed for higher sustained speeds wouldn't be included. Going off these simulations, the fast-paced herbivore likely would have been able to outrun the giant predator of its ecosystem, adult Tyrannosaurus, fairly easily in a straight-up race. Unless T-Rex itself was faster than we thought, which is pretty likely. Biomechanical
Yeah, Edmontosaurs are not to be trifled with.
models by nature can only express a portion of an animal's anatomy, as demonstrated by this rhinoceros totally eating it when charging. Models would indicate that the animal's bones should have shattered, but it was completely fine. That's why I'm a little skeptical of studies that claim T-Rex running speeds were limited to barely being faster than a sprinting human because of the risk of breaking its bones by moving too quickly. At any rate, Edmontosaurus was probably faster than an adult Rex, and we do have strong evidence of the hadrosaurid having escaped being hunted by the tyrant lizard king. A caudal vertebrate.
Yeah. But another thing is, as you already said, with speed and so many of the lifestyle of these animals, or so much, it's a thing of studying the animal in the flesh to actually see how this animal would have lived, and to also get all these stats like speed, for example.
Was found with a T-Rex tooth embedded in it, and the bite had partially healed over before the animal died. This individual, at least, was attacked from behind or the side, and was fast enough to make his escape. Lucky guy. Another Edmontosaurus appeared to have been lightly nipped on the tail, damaging the neural arches of its caudal verts in a half-moon shape that plausibly matches a Rex biting on it from above. The damage was partially healed. And here's some anecdotal information I found interesting that I learned when my wife and I went on a Hell Creek dig with Bucky Derflinger, the guy who discovered cope. He told us that most of the Edmonto specimens found in the area consisted of just the tails, implying that T-Rex preferred to feed on the pelvis upwards since there was more meat there. Thought that was interesting. And speaking of cope, Rex, and Edmontosaurus, on that trip we actually found the articulated tail of a subadult or small adult Edmonto. It was at the cope site in the lower horizon and looked like it had been exposed for quite some time. Thankfully, the verts were mostly covered in an iron concretion that helped them resist weathering.
If this material really turns out to be any good, I'm gonna name it Blister, because, yeah.
We named it Blister. Originally, when we were prospecting at the cope site, we thought it was a big weathered femur since the concretions formed the exact shape of an edmontofemoral head. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be an articulated tail along with fragments of potential limb bone and pelvis. Over the next 2 days, we uncovered more caudals, removing the overburden with pickaxes and shovels, digging through the iron concretion with screwdrivers and knives, and finding a point in the tail where the caudal vertebrae ended before resuming several inches later at a different angle in the iron concretion layer. We took measurements that indicated the exposed portion of the tail was about 8 feet long, which would correspond to a 9 to 10 meter animal. That's fairly small for an Edmontosaurus, so Blister may have been a subadult. We covered the bones with tinfoil and overburden to protect it until the next dig season, so hopefully next year we'll be more prepared to safely excavate the entire tail.
Well, let's have a funeral service now. Here lies Blister. 66 MYA to 66 MYA. Soon to be uncovered again in the next dig season.
He's now in his digging arc.
Do we have any final words for the not so recently deceased? Should have picked a better place to die. Very pithy, I like it. What about you, Bucky?
Should have brought some friends.
He should have brought some friends.
More friends.
All right, so Blister's legacy is not doing enough or being enough.
So while Blister was far from the biggest animal that T-Rex ever hunted, Big Edmontos may very well have taken the title. That doesn't mean that they were defenseless prey animals that would just roll over and die though. Obviously they weren't competing with T-Rex when it comes to weaponry, and on average they seem to have been 2 or 3 tons lighter, but they could still have bitten with their powerful beaks or kicked like an elephant-sized horse. The little fossil evidence that we have of their interactions, however, seems to show injuries to the tail during an escape. That would indicate that they were most likely to flee rather than fight, which, you know, against a T-Rex that's a pretty smart decision, especially if you are in fact the faster runner. Ambush tactics and hunting at night would have been the best way for a Rex to take down an Edmontosaurus in order to counter the speed difference. And in order to hunt a beast like X-Rex, which is several tons heavier than the biggest T-Rex specimens found to date, cooperative hunting may have been needed in order to increase likelihood of success, at least for small Rexes. A fully grown adult may have been able to take it on alone, given the Rex's ridiculous weaponry. The only Rexes we know to be skeletally mature are Cope, Sue, Scotty, Trix, and G-Rex, implying a fully grown adult average mass of well over 10 tons. That would only be a 40% difference in mass, which is a far smaller predator-to-prey ratio than we see in the interactions between modern Komodo dragons and water buffalo. And while a big theropod's bite would certainly be septic, T-Rex's raw physical bite alone could permanently damage bone even of Edmontosaurus that escaped a hunt. We've seen the evidence of that quite clearly. Although, maybe even the giant hadrosaurs of Hell Creek wouldn't have been the biggest animals that T-Rex ever hunted if it turned out that Alamosaurus was on the menu. This North American titanosaur didn't live in Hell Creek at all, as far as we know, but coexisted with Rex in the North Horn, Black Peaks, Javelina, and Ojo Alamo formations. There is a significant possibility that the remains referred to Alamosaurus across these formations actually belong to multiple species or even genera, but with that currently a muddy topic, we'll refer to them as Alamosaurus for now. This titanosaur was big, with the largest specimens at nearly 40 metric tons. Adults would have been able to kick or stomp on potential predators, not to mention the devastating force of a tail slap. That would be a tough ask for any lone theropod to hunt, even the 11 to 12 plus ton individuals like Cope and Sue. However, we do have Alamosaurus material, or at least Maastrichtian North American titanosaur material with tyrannosaurid feeding traces on it. Whether or not that was due to a hunt or a scavenging event is unclear, but the idea of T-Rex at least consuming big sauropods is now supported by fossil evidence. Anecdotally, the T-Rexes found in areas with high hadrosaurid density seem to be bigger and more robust, especially in the lower Hell Creek. Bucky's hypothesis, which does make sense to me, is that the Rexes that hunted Edmontosaurus had an easier and safer time of it during hunts, that allowed them more consistent, easier access to large amounts of food, making it easier.
Yeah, but I think Alamosaurus should be the biggest animal to ever walk in North America, so it's probably 40 tons is probably very, very conservative.
Consistent, easier access to large amounts of food, making it easier for them to grow bigger. The Rexes found in Triceratops-dominated areas are smaller and more gracile, since that would help them in terms of agility and speed against the heavily defended, fast-turning ceratopsians. This hasn't been studied or statistically verified, but I certainly think it's an interesting possibility. The Rexes found around Faith, South Dakota seem to be, built different, in particular. You've got Sue and Cope, which are neck and neck at the moment for the biggest Rex, given how Sue's measurements were underreported in the literature. Bucky was a 16-year-old Rex who was already incredibly robust, with a ribcage nearly as big as Stan's. Victoria was also a robust individual at 17 years of age, and with several more years of active growth to go, was already comparable in size to the Giganotosaurus holotype, if not slightly larger. The biogeographically constrained body mass of Tyrannosaurus is a phenomenon that might be worth some in-depth statistical study to verify.
Wonder if this is how the dwarves felt digging out Moria. I don't know about you, but I would definitely delve too greedily and too deep if it meant finding more good coat material.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this dig-inspired video on Edmontosaurus. I've got a few video ideas based on the adventures we had during our week in South Dakota, including a Nanotyrannus piece, so subscribe to stay updated on all this fun science. You can check out my book, Obsidian Dawn, which is now on sale.
Yeah. So it's incredible how much he actually likes Tyrannosaurus as well, because of how much content he does on them. But it's also nice to see, as you already said, that Megaraptors climb up his rank of favorite dinosaurs the more he learns about them. Yeah, great, neat little stream today. I think that's gonna be it though today for me, guys. I'll see you very soon. Maybe next week again with another stream. Maybe then even longer. And have a good day.